On behalf of the Forum Club of the Palm Beaches, we thank you for your profound public service to the community, and we'd like to honor you with this award.
Good afternoon. That was a nice recitation of my make-believe retirement. In one of those coincidences that are always interesting, it's really meaningful that I'm sharing the podium with Tom Rooney. 24 years ago, his dad made the first event, our kickoff event, when I ran for state attorney, and we worked together at the Children's Place at Home Safe as well, so it's nice to see you again. I'm truly privileged to accept this award from such a prestigious organization, more so to be included in the ranks of previous recipients, Dr. Ed Easy and a dear friend, Bill Brooks. It occurs to me that to be an exemplary elected official, you need an exemplary office. And I have been blessed with my association with the State Attorney's Office since moving to Palm Beach County in 1973. The office then had approximately 12 lawyers. 20 years later, when I was elected state attorney, we were to have 112 lawyers, though we were never fully funded to that level. To quote General Colin Powell, organization doesn't really accomplish anything. Plans don't accomplish anything either. Theories of management don't matter much. Endeavors succeed or fail because of the people involved. Only by attracting the best people will you accomplish great deeds. And I have been honored to work at the state attorney's office with some of the best and the brightest. David Bloodworth was a true role model of an honest prosecutor. Carl Harper, Hal Cohen, Daniel T.K. Hurley, all who became outstanding jurists. Jack Scarola, a highly successful personal injury lawyer. Lou Silber, who is here with me today, a highly successful commercial attorney who tried the first land fraud case in the state of Florida while an assistant state attorney. Ann Vatunak became a federal magistrate. And many more prosecutors from this office were or are currently serving on the bench. In fact, the last two lawyers named by Governor Rick Scott, Kirk Volker and Cheryl Caracuzo, were both homicide prosecutors at the time of their appointment. So I accept this honor on behalf of all the hardworking, incredibly talented, and underpaid lawyers, past and present at the State Attorney's Office. I want to thank my wife and best friend for the past 50 years, Eva, for standing by me through thick and thin. Lastly, my personal thanks to State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg and Sheriff Rick Bradshaw for giving me the opportunity to continue to make use of my 45 years of experience in the criminal justice system. It continues to be deeply rewarding. And to paraphrase Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, you don't remain in office just because you can. Thank you.
As chairman of the Intelligence Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, we have asked Tom Rooney to talk today about the biggest threats facing America. Where do you begin? Just about anywhere you throw a dart on the globe, it seems there's another hotspot. ISIS in the Middle East, Boko Haram in Africa, Al-Qaeda in several countries, after that North Korea and Iran, and terrorist attacks in Europe. The list is very long. Many of you know Tom Rooney from when he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008. His district boundaries have changed since then, and the 17th Congressional District now includes a large portion of Central Florida running from eastern Tampa Bay to the western shores of Lake Okeechobee and covers all of Hardy, DeSoto, Highlands, Okeechobee, Glades, and Charlotte counties and portions of Polk, Manatee, Hillsborough, and Lee counties. Tom sits on the House Appropriation Committee's Subcommittee on Agriculture, Military Construction, and Veterans Affairs, and State Foreign Operations. He is also a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and serves as a deputy whip for the Republican Party. Tom graduated from the Benjamin School in North Palm Beach and received his law degree from the University of Miami, where he met his wife, Tara. He and Tara spent more than 4 years in the U.S. Army JAG Corps, and he served as Special Assistant to U.S. Attorney at Fort Hood, Texas, prosecuting civilian crimes on the post. In 2002, he was selected to teach constitutional and criminal law at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point. Tom returned to Florida in 2004 and went to work as an assistant attorney general. After leaving the Attorney General's office, he became CEO of the Children's Place at Home Safe, a home for abused and neglected children. He was later appointed by Governor Jeb Bush to the Board of Directors of the Children's Services Council of Palm Beach County. In 2006, he entered private practice and joined a Stuart law firm before running for Congress in 2008. Please join me now in welcoming U.S. Representative Tom Rooney.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail, for that introduction, and congratulations to Barry for your award. It is kind of ironic that we're both sharing the same stage, having worked together at Home Safe, especially with victims of domestic violence, so it's well-deserved, and congratulations. As Gail said, I grew up in North Palm Beach County. I'm actually a little bit nervous talking today. I've kind of gotten over that over the course of my career in politics, being nervous in front of big crowds like this, but I see so many faces and so many people have come up to me that I haven't seen in so long that I kind of feel like I'm back at Benjamin, that I really don't want to screw this up. So I was trying to give some advice to the debate teams over there on what to do when you're in a debate, or if they go to law school, if you're going against an opposing counsel. And so this will be an example of a pretty sided argument. If you want the opposite argument, as I told you that you should know cold, there is an article in today's Palm Beach Post that gives the opposing view from a professor from Lynn University, so you should check that out. Also, the last time I was on this podium, although I think it was at the Kravitz Center, you may remember I was debating an empty podium. And, you know, I think I actually won that debate. And it was probably one of my best performances, so the Forum Club always has a special place in my heart. My wife is here, my mom and dad, a lot of my extended family members are here, so I appreciate the warm welcome that you gave, and it certainly means a lot. I have a son now who's 13, and he's starting to understand the news, and he's starting to watch the news and see what's on TV. And he's asking me if what they say about members of Congress bothers me, because it's usually bad. And I got to be honest, it is a tough question to answer, because much of it is certainly deserved. Our House Republican majority, I'm a Republican if you didn't know that, is starting to do some good things, but our failures and the infighting that we have definitely cloud out a lot of that good work. But some of that work and a lot of the things that I focus on in my time in Congress deal with what goes on in the Intelligence Committee. And as Gail mentioned, the Speaker of the House appointed me again this term. I've been appointed since 2011, and this January I became the chairman of the Emerging Threat Subcommittee. Our committee meets almost daily in a room about 5 stories under the Capitol building, in a secure room that has a door that's about that thick to get into. We get briefed by members of the intelligence community, the CIA, et cetera, on what's going on in the world. It's a lot of information. It's a lot that would keep most people awake at night. But what's good, what's reassuring, and what I tell people when they ask me about generalities that I can't get into specifics, is that meeting with these people, I am reassured that we do have the best of the best and top-notch professionals that make up the intelligence community. And these patriots, by the way, a word that is way overused recently, but these men and women who sacrifice and toil in the shadows and don't get any recognition, or shouldn't, and don't oftentimes unless something goes wrong, really deserve our credit. You know, I was thinking about my speech, and an example of this. When I went to Pakistan a few years back, I traveled to a town called Peshawar, which if I was invited to go back there right now, I'd probably decline because of how dangerous it is. But we met some of our folks over there, and I remember meeting a young lady who looked to me to be in her early 20s, and she was explaining to me what she was doing and some of the mission she was on, and I couldn't help but just look at her, and the only thing that I could think of, and probably inappropriate to say to her, I said, "Do your parents know you're here?" But it just goes to show, and I mean, this person was at the top of her class and of what she was doing. I can't really go into specifics of who she was or what exactly her title was, but it's just amazing, and thank God that there are people out there like her who are willing to do what probably nobody in this room would be willing to do to keep us safe. She puts her life on the line. They put their lives on the line and work tirelessly so that we can sleep in peace. And incidentally, about a week after I met her, we had a mission in a town not too far away from there called Abbottabad, where we got Osama bin Laden. So I wouldn't have been surprised if she was there and part of that. So, to the debate teams and to everybody here that knows that I'm a Republican, I apologize in advance if what I'm about to talk about sounds overly partisan. It's not. I wish I was wrong about the things that I'm going to talk about. I have confidence in those people that are in the CIA, that are in the intelligence community. Director Brennan is somebody that I've come to trust and respect, as was Panetta, as was Petraeus. But I can't say the same about the leadership at the top, and that's not just President Obama. That's also the Republican-controlled Congress that since the last 6 years has orchestrated a 20% decline in our defense budget, which includes intelligence. The result is a smaller force, less ready, less capable of meeting the 21st century needs that we have. We have allowed our budget to determine our national security strategy, rather than our security needs determining our budget. Let me say that again. We have allowed our budget to determine our national security needs rather than security determining the budget. This is just backwards, and it's wrong. So when people ask me what keeps me up at night, it's that. It's that we are not necessarily the one group or particular issue or terror scenario, because there's a lot of those, but that we face these untold threats and decided that defeating those threats is just not worth the cost. That is, keeping our citizens safe is not worth the cost. That patting ourselves on the back for cutting spending or keeping taxes low or blocking reforms to our unsustainable entitlement programs. All of these things are more important than national security. And that's why Washington, D.C. is failing you. And I'm part of that. The Constitution is clear. More than anything that I read in the Constitution, our single largest charge by the Founding Fathers was to provide for the common defense. Because in the end, when something goes wrong, when something happens, when we have another 9/11, you all are going to be looking to me and to my colleagues that I serve with and ask, what were you doing? What the hell went wrong? Why did this happen? And what's my response going to be to you? What's our response going to be to you? Spending cuts? That's not why we're elected, and that's not what I think you want for your children and grandchildren. And again, although I am a Republican, I want to make sure that I'm an equal opportunity critic, because I know Gail didn't want me to get up here and give some Republican political rah-rah speech, because there is plenty of blame to go around with regard to our national security budget, our military readiness, and the ability to confront the threats that we face to protect our nation. I'll be blunt. I think this administration and this Congress have utterly failed to lead on a world stage. Most experts agree. That's okay. Most experts agree that this is the most dangerous time we've faced in the world since the Cold War. And whether you like it or not, America is the world leader. How we act and what we do has a preeminent effect on what goes on in the rest of the world. Our actions or our inactions dictate if there's peace and stability or turmoil and war. The world is in turmoil, if you haven't noticed. If you don't believe me, just ask the president's two of the three former secretaries of defense, Gates and Panetta, and what they've said since they've left office. This is what they've said. And that there is no Obama doctrine. Instead, the closest thing to guiding principles for how and when the administration will act are, don't do stupid stuff. That's their words, not mine. We owe it to you and we owe it to our children to do better so that our children aren't cleaning up the mistakes that we're making right now. You know, Senator Rubio likes to say that every generation of Americans, he says it a lot better than me, but every generation of Americans have left the next generation better off than they found it. I just don't think that we're doing that right now. And how did this come about? You may remember a couple years ago, 4 years ago to be exact, we passed a law called the Budget Control Act. Rather than reducing deficits directly, that bill, at the assistance of the president, included what we call the sequester. The sequester was an across-the-board set of automatic cuts that if Congress couldn't reach a large bipartisan deal would come into existence. You may remember that was what was being debated was called a grand bargain. The grand bargain didn't happen. Half of the cuts would come from defense, even though defense only makes up 16% of our budget. The defense cuts would be so devastating to our national security that the Congress would have to reach an agreement. I remember being told, we will never go there. This will never happen because it's so bad, it will inflict so much pain on our defense and the Pentagon that we will not ever allow sequestration to happen. And on the left, it would also be painful because a lot of the programs that the people on the Democratic side of the aisle wouldn't want to go there either because it would be equally painful to them. So we would never get to sequestration. But because Congress couldn't agree on anything, and we were constantly in gridlock, what the powers that be decided to do was get some of the more senior, sober, intellectually smart members of Congress to be what's called part of this super committee. You may remember the super committee. The super committee was the guys that were going to bail the rest of us out because we couldn't come up with an agreement, so that these things wouldn't happen, so that the cuts that we made weren't just this lopping off the top, which is a horrible way to cut spending. By the way, you elect us to go to Washington so we don't do stuff like that. So we don't just lop off the top where pilots can't train or troops have to be reduced in some arbitrary way. We're supposed to do it in a way that's smart, and we didn't do that. Well, the super committee failed too, as you know. No deal was reached. Some on our side actually rejoiced. I remember going on the Laura Ingraham show, who some of you may know is a right of center talk show host that has a radio program, telling her how important it was that sequestration couldn't happen, that we had to reverse them because it would be devastating to our military and national security. And she literally called me Obama's best friend in Congress. I was literally dumbfounded. It was like a new world. The armed forces have responded in a way that only they can, reducing troop numbers and training exercises, eliminating research and development, cutting back on purchases of new equipment and technology, and retiring aircraft and aircraft carriers earlier than planned. And we're already seeing the impact. Only a handful of Army brigades are ready for crisis response. We have Air Force pilots that are unable to fly enough hours to keep their skills sharp. Our Navy doesn't have enough ships to maintain a security presence in critical regions. The Army Chief of Staff Ray Odierno recently testified that the Army is as unready as any other point in American history. Air Force Chief of Staff Mark Welsh told Congress that the Air Force is the smallest it's ever been, and its fleet is the oldest it's ever been. Not too long ago, we measured our capability by being able to fight 2 consecutive wars at the same time. Those days are gone. This is absolutely unacceptable. Our troops are putting their lives on the line every day and deserve our support. And our support means giving them the tools and the weapons they need to protect themselves so that they can protect us. And it's hard for me to reconcile this as a Republican with my GOP colleagues who are giddy to cut defense. This is not the party of Ronald Reagan. It's not the Republican Party that has long prided itself as the party of national security. Reagan expanded the military, and we won the Cold War. We're cutting the military, and Putin is on the march. Do you think that this is a coincidence? I don't. And politically speaking, it will not be a Republican Party that can offer an alternative to President Obama's defense policies in 2016. So, the next time you hear one of these Republican candidates invoke Ronald Reagan, but also are the big cheerleaders of being isolationist or cutting our defense or not wanting to engage in the world, ask yourself if that's what Reagan really thought, because it's not. So what has changed in the last 4 years? How did we go from someone like me thinking this is unthinkable to this being the new normal? Is the world a safer place? Obviously not. I'll talk real briefly about ISIS. Henry Kissinger recently said that we face the most diverse and complex array of crisis since the end of World War II. Director Brennan of the CIA and Director of National Intelligence Clapper have recently said similar things. Let's look at the Middle East, starting with the Arab Spring in 2011. The political dynamics of the entire region since then have turned upside down. Since the president sent warplanes into Libya to take out Gaddafi in the Arab Spring and in Egypt. Unrest now is the norm, and violence dominate countries like Libya, Egypt, and Yemen. I would say Libya and Yemen are completely failed states. The instability of any of these countries obviously could endanger the United States and our allies and potentially draw us into another conflict. If you don't believe me, just look at the other two countries we see on the news from time to time nowadays that are in that have power vacuums and civil war left in the Arab Spring's wake, Iraq and Syria. The civil war in Syria and the lack of governing authority in Iraq have created the perfect opportunity for a group like ISIS to thrive. And don't forget that the lack of status as a forces agreement in Iraq after our withdrawal left any semblance of a stabilizing force, like we had in Korea, like we had in Japan, like we had in Germany. I agree with the president when he says that ISIS should be defeated. I agree that if we don't act, their sphere of influence could expand and will expand and potentially affect us here in the United States. We're not there yet, but I can tell you, without going into too much detail, we get briefs a lot on people that are trying to recruit and expand in the United States. But I firmly disagree with the president that we can destroy ISIS with airstrikes alone, and that arming these so-called good rebels is the strategy that will clean up the mess. This plan is doomed to fail. Ask anybody that has a military background and has served in the military. I haven't found one that agrees that that kind of strategy can work. I've also always opposed this idea of arming the rebels. First when the administration proposed to fight Assad, and now when the administration is proposing it to fight ISIS, who is also fighting Assad. Officials have told me multiple times that we'll have no assurances that these weapons will stay in the right hands. In fact, it's probably likely that we are directly arming Al-Qaeda and ISIS with this program. That's a high-risk plan with little chance to turn the tide, even if our weapons stayed in the right hands completely. The president has ruled out sending ground troops. Let me be clear, nobody wants to go back to war. Nobody wants to send our children. I have 3 sons. The last thing I want to do is see them get sent to war to fight a group like ISIS. But that doesn't take away the risk for our country. These airmen that are piloting the airstrikes put their lives on the line every day. And God forbid if one of them is captured like that Jordanian pilot that we all watched get burned to death a couple weeks ago. But ISIS isn't the biggest thing that keeps me awake at night, or that I think that people in this room should pay attention to. It's Iran. While we face a growing enemy in ISIS, and we certainly see what they do on TV, and it shocks the senses, we're also facing an Iran still governed by extremists who yell death to America, who want to wipe Israel off the face of the map and want to acquire a nuclear weapon. In fact, we recently just helped Iran liberate the town of Tikrit in Iraq. This was Saddam Hussein's hometown. So we're fighting with Iran to help get rid of ISIS in Tikrit. And when we left there, we saw graffiti on the walls around the town, written in Iranian Farsi, the people that we were just fighting with, that said "Death to America" all over the town. Also, you may remember not too long ago, I think last week, we were fighting with Saudi Arabia in Yemen against the Houthis, who are backed by Iran. At the same time, we were fighting with Iran in Iraq against ISIS. So, also quoting John Stuart, we're literally fighting a proxy war against ourselves. We're fighting with Iran at the same time we're fighting against them. All of this time we're negotiating a nuclear deal with Secretary Kerry. So how do we do all this with defense cuts, real or perceived? And what message does that send to countries, not just Iran, but North Korea, who want to strike when the iron's hot? Move forward with the development of their plans or negotiate with the weakened United States? That's exactly what Iran has done. They've continued to work towards the bomb, acting aggressively against their neighbors and supporting attacks against Israel. And what are they getting as a result? They're getting almost everything that they want. You talk about how they got driven to the negotiating table was because of crippling sanctions. They came to the negotiating table because they had to. And ever since there, we've gone from here and Iran here to here. They've moved, or the opposite, I'm sorry. We've continued to move towards their direction and they have not budged. We have never been okay with Iran getting a nuclear bomb. And what this deal basically says, that in 10 to 15 years, they're not allowed to have one, they're allowed to have certain capabilities, but what they're essentially saying is after those 10 years, we're essentially saying it's okay. We've never, ever had that stance before. So what has this also done? It's also put Saudi Arabia completely in turmoil as far as what they're going to do now. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole Shia versus Sunni thing because that could be a whole nother lunch. But that's essentially what you have, ages-old conflict between Shia and Sunni. Now, one of them is basically going to be permitted without sanctions and with an emboldened government, the mullahs, and the Sunni Saudi Arabians are not going to. Well, they're not going to stand around and wait, and they're not going to wait to get attacked. And they know that Iran will use whatever it takes if they have to. How do I know this? Let's just look at the last year. Do you know who's in control of Beirut in Lebanon, Sana'a in Yemen, Damascus in Syria, Baghdad in Iraq? Iran is. They control 5 capitals, including Tehran, in the Middle East. And this has all happened during this administration's time period. And we're negotiating this deal, which is going to allow them to have the most destructive weapon mankind knows. So Saudi Arabia isn't going to wait around. They're already talking to Pakistan to figure out how they can match that. What we've done is just spur a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. So I'll say that both parties agree for the sake of peace, in my opinion. This is where I stand, and I think some of the critics. Read the Palm Beach Post today in the opinion section if you want to hear the other side. But for the sake of peace and stability in the Middle East, and for the sake of American security, and for the sake of the very existence, in my opinion, of Israel, any agreement that removes sanctions must completely close the door to a nuclear Iran forever. I don't know where I'm at as far as time, but okay. I'll just touch really quick on Russia. Obviously, I've mentioned before, Russia, I get the sense from what's happening in the rest of the world that a lot of us forget about what's happening in Russia and the kind of leave behind strategy that we have. Russia's taken notice. Putin has taken notice. And Putin is trying to test the waters as much as he can. Obviously, with what's going on in Ukraine, I remember when the president kind of mocked our nominee, Mitt Romney, for calling Russia the largest geopolitical foe during the debates, and that the 1980s wanted their foreign policy back. Well, since then, they've taken over Crimea. They're on the march for more. Thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. Georgia remains unstable. And our friends in Poland and our friends in the other former Soviet bloc countries are extremely nervous. I had the opportunity to travel to those countries last year and to Russia. And I was struck by how much they loved Americans. And it wasn't phony. Like, they'd see me walking down the street. I guess I look like the quintessential American. You know, I didn't have like a Van Halen t-shirt on or something, but I might as well have. But literally, people would come up to me on the street, and I'd be like, oh, here we go. Somebody, you know, wants something from me or something. Literally, I had multiple people come up and just want to shake my hand in Georgia, in Estonia, in these countries that we visited, just because they heard me talking and said, are you American? I said, yes, I am. Like, I just wanted to thank you. There's statues of Ronald Reagan all over those countries, and they are scared to death right now. The freedom is in jeopardy. So I want to conclude by just saying, from ISIS to Iran to Russia, growing dangers from around the world will inevitably place new challenges to our military. Yet we'll ask them to face these challenges with less funding, less training, less equipment, less support, and less troop levels. This increases the risk of higher casualties and even failure to complete the mission that we ask them to do. Our troops are directly paying the price for our budget cuts, and the cost to ramp up, as some of you that served in the military and saw what happened in the Jimmy Carter years in the 1970s, the cost to ramp up is going to be infinitely more than just sustaining what we have. So what do? We have to return to a place where national security needs dictate our national security and not vice versa. And our budget has to reflect that. We cannot balance our budget on the backs of our military. Defense spending is at the lowest level since before World War II, lower than the hollowed-out phase of the 70s I spoke of, lower than the 1990s when a Republican Congress and a Democratic president balanced the budget. You may say that, well, we still spend so much than every other country combined. And that's true. But if we're not the strongest country in the world, who do you want to be? Under current law, defense spending will continue declining while deficits and debt will continue climbing. In a few years, we'll spend more on the interest on that debt than defense. In just a few short decades, our entire budget will be taken over by entitlements. There's no budget for military. There's no budget for roads. There's no budget for the Intelligence Committee. It's all taken up by Medicare and Social Security. And one of the nice things about speaking to you all here today, even though I know most of you very well, is that you can't vote for me anymore, so I'm going to tell you what I think is the real truth. Because nobody wants to talk about, in Palm Beach County, reforming Social Security and Medicare. It's the third rail of politics. But look at any graph. Talk to most economists will agree that we are on an unsustainable path. We cannot continue on this path without doing something. Without doing something like Simpson Bowles, or something where we can get together and figure out how to just not get reelected because we're saying the things that we know are poll tested to help us get reelected. Like, I'm not going to raise taxes, or I'm not going to touch Social Security. Because if politicians continue to tell you those things, then they're not really serious about solving the issue. They're just serious about continuing to have this job, like Mr. Krischer was saying. Fortunately, I will just say on an end note that the Republicans and the Democrats did get together last week to pass a budget that did include offset for the sequester for defense spending, but we could only get it done for 1 year. So next year we'll be right back in the same place talking about whether or not this funding is needed for a long-term strategy. And I think I have a few more pages here, but I feel like I'm going way over. I got off my script there a few times, which is because I'm Irish and I can't help it. So I just want to say I think that you all deserve better than what you're getting in Washington. And while it's truly an honor for me to serve and be a member of Congress and to walk in that building and put my card in and get to vote for Florida, I just see so many things that just leaves me speechless. And, you know, it's unfortunate. So many people fall in love with the job and fall in love with that title. We've seen it recently on both sides of the aisle. One of my good friends from Illinois who decided to decorate his office like Downton Abbey and use taxpayer dollars for things that are just unbelievable. But also on the Democratic side of the aisle, we had Anthony Weiner who had some of the same issues. And what happens is people just fall in love with being the congressman. I'm the congressman. I'm a representative. It literally defines everything that they are. And they want to hold on to it or do whatever they can to make sure that they never lose that. And that's a real problem. And so I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep doing what I can, specifically when it comes to intelligence community and our defense spending. But it does really mean a lot that I have a lot of support and love in this room. And I've had more people say they love me today, which is weird. Maybe we're still in the Easter spirit or something, but speaking of love, my wife's here. Can you stand up for a second? Just stand up for a second. Barry got to mention his wife, so I get to mention mine. You know, Tara doesn't come to stuff often, but she's raising our 3 sons, and they're still small, and so it's not easy being a politician's spouse. And I think that any politician that's in here will agree with that. And Tara served in the Army as a judge advocate. She was a captain on active duty. I like to say she was voted the best looking member of the Army. She actually did wear combat boots. But anyway, thank you. I love you. So thank you very much.
Okay, those questions we will have from our students. They're often the hardest. Oxbridge Academy, are you ready with your question? If you rise and say your name and ask your question.
I'm Adriana Hunt. Should the U.S. military take a unilateral, active, aggressive stance against terrorism in other parts of the world, or should we continue to fight terrorism through organizations like UN and NATO?
I think that our job is to provide for the common defense. If we are threatened or our allies are threatened, then waiting for what the UN wants to do, I think, is a waste of time. Now, I will say it's nice to get them on board. I mean, certainly if you can get a coalition, that's always better than going it alone. But our job is to protect you. Our job is to protect the people in this room from harm. Because, you know, someone once told me that, you know, we're talking about national security. If you're not safe, even if you don't feel safe, then you're not free. If you're not free and you don't have liberty, then the very existence of what we're doing here in the American experiment ceases to exist. My job is to make sure that you go to bed at night not feeling scared. Most people in the world don't have that luxury like we have that luxury. And that's why we are the United States of America. That's why we should be the best in the world. And it's never wrong to stand up for what we believe in is right or apologize for who we are. So to answer your question, if I feel like we are directly threatened by a certain threat and America has to act alone, then absolutely yes. But it's a good idea to get the UN if you can.
Okay, next, Palm Beach Central.
Good afternoon, Congressman Rooney. My name is Caroline Canane, and I am from the Palm Beach Central High School debate team. Several presidents have struggled to get the Department of Veterans Affairs to be more efficient and more effective. They have failed. With over 2 million troops deployed to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, many veterans have faced mental and physical health crises upon returning home. With some 20 veterans a day committing suicide, you recently helped pass legislation stepping up help for these wounded warriors. As a veteran yourself, can you speak to the barriers that plague the VA?
Oh, that's huge. I'm the chairman of the Invisible Wounds Caucus, which is the caucus that deals a lot with the amount of suicides that we're dealing with from members of our military every day. And we did have a little bit of success with the bill that you referred to. I had language in an appropriation bill last year that said if you couldn't get to a mental health specialist to talk to them about things that you're dealing with because the VA hospital was too far away, that we would fund you to go to a local, if you lived in a lot of places that I represent now out in the countryside, that you could go to somebody locally and bill the government. A lot of people have talked about, you know, like a green card, not a green card with regard to immigration, but a green card that is kind of like, you know, a GI Bill for kids that serve in the military and then we pay to go to school, that we should have the same thing for our veterans to be able to go to hospitals if they don't have a facility like the one we have here in West Palm Beach, that I can use this card and basically go to any hospital and be like, I wore the uniform, you need to take care of me after I get out of the military. But you ask a great question. We've had a lot of secretaries of the Veterans Administration that have failed, and a lot of them have come on hard times. We got a new guy in there now who's a businessman, and I got to meet him in my office and also question him on the committee. I asked him the same thing that you just asked me. Like, you're going to be here for 2 years. What are you going to be able to do differently in those 2 years that your predecessors can never seem to get done? Like, for instance, one thing that drives me crazy. When Tara and I joined the Army, and you know, you put your Social Security number in, and they follow you with your medical records and with everything that your PT test scores, everything follows you. But once you process out of active duty and get out of the Army, and you're going into the VA, you're basically starting all over again. Like, I can't understand why when you join the military, why that doesn't go from when you serve on active duty right through to the VA. You know why the reason there isn't? Is because they don't have the same computer systems, and they won't. It's like a competition. I'm not going to use yours. Well, why don't you use mine? Why would I have to use yours? So when I joined the military, I don't want, and we talk about, you know, John Stuart also has like these clips of all the paperwork that the VA deals with. When we're in the age of computers, why all that stuff isn't electronic right now is literally because of egos between bureaucratic government agencies. That's all. Until they get together or they have a president say, you two guys are going to start working on the same network. When Tara Lombardi joins the Army, until the day that she dies, she's going to be in the system. Literally, for those of you that were in the military, you remember, if you would lose your shot records between duty stations, guess what? They don't have it on the internet, or they don't have it on file. You're getting all those shots again, even if you just had them a month ago when you left your last duty station. It's ridiculous how backwards we have those things. So I think that one of the things that we can do is have a computer system that talks to each other from DOD through the VA. That would really help a lot, and it's easy to do. But it's government bureaucracy that's holding it back.
Okay, we'll start now with some questions from our audience. Is there one domestic issue that Congress and the President could agree on this term?
You know, again, I don't mean to sound partisan, but one of the things that, you know, happens when elections happen, and there are consequences because of election. You remember when Bill Clinton lost huge majorities in '94, he came to Newt Gingrich and they got welfare reform done. This president, when he lost the House and lost the Senate, literally came on TV and said, maybe I didn't explain myself to the American people well enough. Like we're all, dumb and we didn't get what he was trying to sell the last time. I know that was extremely partisan, but I'm sorry. But honestly, I don't know. This president, you can ask people that are on the Democratic side of the aisle, he does not come to Capitol Hill. He doesn't get on the phones and work the phones like Clinton did. He doesn't want to have to involve the legislative branch in anything that he does. That's just his style. So thinking that he's going to work with us to get something done, I honestly can't think of it. I mean, we have the Senate now, but we need 60 and we don't have it. We just passed a permanent doc fix. For those of you that are doctors, you may know what that's. We've been doing this patch every year for Medicaid or Medicare reimbursements to doctors, which is not a good way to do business. So we finally got together. Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner got together and agreed that they would do a permanent doc fix. And it's basically because of Harry Reid in the Senate is not letting it get to that 60 mark over there, so it might die. That would have been an easy one. When you got Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner agreeing, and it falls apart thereafter, you have to ask yourself, why is that happening? It's happening because somebody doesn't think it's a political idea to let somebody have a political win. And that's the only reason why. I can't tell you how much in Washington, and this is true on our side, but I know it's true on the other side too, because I sit in the leadership meetings. And it drives me crazy when we're getting ready to do something that we have to do, like a debt ceiling or a continuing resolution or something to keep the government open so we don't shut down. The first thought that comes to mind for a lot of these guys that are in leadership on both sides of the aisle is, how are we going to jam the other side? How are we going to make them take a vote to keep the government open, but also has something attached that's going to make them feel real uneasy? We do that all the time, and it's absolutely maddening, but it's politics.
When Tom Ridge spoke to the Forum Club, he said about cyber terrorism that there are two kinds of companies, ones that have been hacked and ones that don't know yet they've been hacked. Do you agree?
I agree. He's right. And the other thing that scares me about cyber terrorism is that, we're constantly fighting it. I will say, not to be completely a downer all day today, but I will say that we have the best people in the world and the best systems to combat that cyber terrorism. Now, whether or not private companies want to link up with the government, that's been another sort of debate that it's been interesting, that they don't want our help because they're afraid of that we're going to be looking into what they do too. No, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Russians, these superpower wannabe countries have very sophisticated capabilities to try to hack into private businesses, our government, to wreak havoc, to cause us pain. I didn't even get into what North Korea is trying to do when it comes to an electromagnetic pulse. That's a whole other Forum Club debate or lunch as well, but that's also very scary.
How have the revelations by Edward Snowden affected the intelligence community?
Terrible. This guy's been here. What were we watching? The Academy Awards or something, and somebody got up and they were singing Edward Snowden's praise. This guy has single-handedly done more to hurt this country than anybody in a generation. Do you know that the stuff that he first went to China with, which they got it all, and then he took to Moscow, which they got it all? It wasn't just the fact that he was trying to say that your government is looking at your emails and listening to your phone calls. Is that true? Yeah, it was true about 11 times. And you know what those 11 times were? It was people that were reading the emails of their ex-spouses that worked at the NSA. Of the billions upon billions of emails and phone calls. When Clapper got in trouble for saying, do you read people's emails? And he says, no, not that I can think of, which was stupid for him to do that. But the truth was that they did for about 11 people. But do you know what else was in that intel that Edward Snowden swiped? Our shipping lanes through the Middle East, how we maneuver militarily. We had to change all of that. What we're doing overhead, how we're looking at other countries that mean to do us harm. All of the things that we do, all of the things that we try to do for national security, he gave it all to them. We literally had to change the way we do business across the board because of Edward Snowden. And some people think that this guy is a hero, this guy is a traitor. Look, I taught constitutional law at West Point. I believe in the Bill of Rights. I believe in our Constitution. I do not believe in the government intruding upon your First Amendment. But if you think for 1 second that the government is reading your emails in this room or listening to your phone calls, you are wrong. This is the same government that can't get the DOD and the VA to talk to each other. I mean, think about that for a second.
Okay, we stole our last question from Palm Beach Central High School, and we thank them for this. It's a little long. Oops. The recent retirement of the first NFL player, Chris Borland, has refocused the debate on the safety of football. The NFL is near $1 billion settlement with former players who have sustained permanent brain damage. You're a member of a family with close ties to 2 NFL franchises, a congressman whose responsibilities include oversight of the NFL's antitrust exemption, and a former college football player. Do you feel the league is doing enough to protect players?
Well, my Uncle Art's here, so maybe I'll have him come up. I do. I was on the Judiciary Committee before I was on the Appropriations Committee, and we had the NFL testify what they did in the past versus what they are doing now. I think that they are trying to get to a place where they are doing all that they can. Is that going to keep people from getting concussions? I had concussions. Maybe that explains a lot, but I literally walk into rooms now and be like, I have no idea why I'm in this room, and have to go back to the last room to see if it'll jog my memory. But I think that they're doing the best that they can, but I think that the awareness that has come out with all the concussions and like this guy from the 49ers and other players, we had a player that just left, although I think for other reasons, that was in the prime of his career, leave. And I think that, it definitely, I have a 13-year-old son that plays full contact football. And I had the NFL and experts talk about brain injury and what it could mean to a developing brain of somebody that was under 15, and believe me, it gave me pause. Now, my son's a quarterback, so I'm hoping that he doesn't get hit. This is my rationale, right or wrong. So I'm hoping he doesn't get hit as much, but he really wants to play, and our 11-year-old really wants to play, and I'm not letting him right now until he's at least 15, because they say that the brain, if it's over 15 years old, you have a lot better chance of recovery. But do I believe that the NFL is trying to do everything that they can right now to address this issue? Yeah, because guess what? If they don't, a lot of kids like my kids aren't going to be playing football anymore. And then they're going to be stuck with a sport that's on the decline and not as revenue building as it is, I imagine. So if they don't do everything that they can, I think that it's going to hurt the bottom line. And plus it's the right thing to do. I'd like to think that everything that the people that work for our team do the right thing with the information that they have at the time. But I will say one other thing with regard to that. I recently had this guy in my office who invented this. One of the cool things about being a congressman, you meet these really cool people that come in. He made this headband that literally, if you take a hit to the helmet, the doctor can be on the sideline with a chart which will show if it goes above a certain line that it was a hit that would merit what would be a concussion. And so it's not just the player coming over and you look in the eyes and be like, hey, how you doing? Are you all right? What's the player going to say? I'm fine. Let me go back in. Well, the computer actually says whether or not he's lying or not. So you can take him out of that game. You know what the problem with that invention is? Because he's taken it to the NFL. The NFL is good with it. You know who's not good with it? The players' union. Why are the players' union against it? Because if somebody has too many concussions and they're up for a new contract next year, do you think that they're going to get more or less money if it's known that the computer says that they're concussion prone? Less money. So the players union actually are the ones that don't want that kind of technology in football. But I'd like to see it at least at the high school and grade school level.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a gift for you. We thank you very much for coming. You were great. I was going to say I love you. If the students from the two high schools,
Actually, about Anne Frank. I mean, I would like to mention, it's